Shabbat Shalom. So I'm going to share some thoughts about the Parsha, and then we'll have some time for some discussion and for everyone, or some of you at least, to get to respond and share your thoughts as well. So Parshat Truma, this week's Parsha, is really, most of it is extremely detailed instructions about how to build the Mishkan, the mobile sanctuary that the Israelites carried around in the wilderness, rebuilt and dismantled and rebuilt a whole bunch of times. There's a lot of detail about the design, and lots of interior decorating, lots of architecture. And most of it is really kind of about the materials and the color, appearance, and feel. But there are a couple of lines that give instructions. One of them we heard when Linda was laning at the very beginning. They give instructions for how the Mishkan is to be positioned in space, north, south, east, and west, kind of like directionally how it is set up. What goes where. And when I was looking at the centuries of midrash and commentary on these verses, I came to think that these verses actually have a profound lesson for us about connecting with the natural world and the earth and the land that we're on as a human dwelling place. So I'm excited to share some of this, and then we'll see what other folks have to say about it. So the first one of these verses is in Exodus 26:35. We learn that in the Mishkan, the table for where the showbread goes, these loaves of bread, it goes on the north wall. And the lampstand, as it's translated, the menorah, goes on the south wall. So if we were this way is east, so that would be the north wall and the south wall. Both of these items are right outside the parochet, which is the curtain separating the Holy of Holies where the Ark is, which is actually on the west side in the Mishkan and in the temple. So I was reading this year, and I wondered, what does it matter how our sacred spaces are set up? I think it certainly matters what the spaces look like or feel like, those materials, a beautiful ark. Like this one can inspire awe. It can literally be breathtaking, kind of help us slow down for Shabbat. It seems like this verse is suggesting, though, that it's not just the sensory experience that matters, but actually how we're oriented in space. So we learn exactly how the menorah is made, the worked metal, beautiful almond branches as a shape, and then we also learn that every time it is packed up and reassembled, it needs to be put on the south wall. Hiskuni, who's a rabbi who lived in France in the 1200s, explains that this specificity is because light always emanates from the south. The light of the sun always comes from the south, whose orbit proceeds southward after it rises in the morning. The word for south in Hebrew, actually, darom, can be understood to mean height, referring to the fact that in the northern hemisphere, at least, the sun always reaches its greatest height in the southern sky. North, tzafon, means hidden, because the sun never appears in the northern sky. It's always kind of traveling in a slightly southward, at least, path, depending on where you are. This is, of course, the opposite is true in the southern hemisphere, but all of these commentators that we're reading share our location, which is in the northern hemisphere. So we could understand that the placement of the menorah, this sacred life-giving object, is kind of mirroring or paralleling, or maybe even honoring, the way that the light-giving sun is moving through the natural world. So I'm thinking here also about kind of our human sense of direction. Some of us have a strong sense of direction, and maybe, aside from the fact that the ark is here, you might have already known before I said this way is north and this way is south. Some of us are more directionally challenged. In contrast to humans, though, birds have a bodily internal sense of direction. They migrate based on that sense, and at least some species of birds, their bodies literally have a magnetic kind of something in them that allows them to sync themselves with the magnetic field of the earth so that they can migrate. As humans, we don't have that, and I think especially in our modern world, we're often inside, we might even be underground. It can be really easy to lose track of where we are. I often, when I'm coming out of the subway, if I've had to, make some twists and turns, I'm like, where am I? Where am I supposed to go? And I have to look at the streets to help me figure out which direction is which. So in the synagogue here, where the ark is placed on the eastern wall, perhaps that gives us a sense of direction. It helps orient us in this kind of big picture, planetary geography kind of way. Maybe it's a map of sorts in our own, not physical migration so much as the migration of our souls, kind of helping our hearts find a way. It's common practice, as many folks probably know, in communities that are west of Jerusalem, like us, to have the ark on the eastern wall. And at SAJ, this was not always the case. As folks also may know some of this history, that the reason why we have this memorial little ensconcement here is because originally the ark was there. The reason why it is traditionally on the eastern wall kind of echoes the temple, not the construction of the temple, but similar to how the menorah is in the south and the sun is in the south. It's like the temple would be to the east of us. So we're kind of honoring that, and our ark is kind of echoing the holy ark of the temple. And it's placed, we're facing that direction when we pray. At SAJ, though, it was originally on the north wall, and I did a little bit of research to find out more. It was moved in around 2004. Some folks may have been around for that, and you can share your stories at the end if you have anything you want to add. So Rabbi Kaplan, he rejected this traditional idea that we should be praying for the restoration of the temple and its service. So perhaps it wasn't as important to him to have the ark facing the temple. Maybe putting it on the northern wall was a reminder that we could get to reconstruct Judaism. More practically, simply just because of the layout of the grid in Manhattan, this is not the only sanctuary in Manhattan that has the ark not on the eastern wall, because of coming into the sanctuary and having it, being able to just kind of see it when you come in. And also, I learned from Ira Schachner, who's a member of this congregation and an architect who was involved in the process, that he said that really in Kaplan's days, like the sanctuary was more of like a lecture hall almost, or that was maybe how people thought of it. And the bima was actually almost 6 feet off the ground, like an auditorium platform. I think I remembers this. Yeah. So the whole thing was really kind of set up more as a lecture hall. So when Rabbi Michael Strassfeld was here, the congregation had, I think, maybe a series of meetings and decided there was a whole redesigning of the sanctuary that happened. And the ark was moved. And Rabbi Michael told me that it was both so that the ark could be on the east wall as traditional, that people wanted that. It was kind of confusing which way to face and all of that, and also to make the space feel more intimate. So this way, when we're here, everybody kind of can face each other a little bit more, and you're not like 30 rows back from the front of the room when you come in. So the setup of our space has mattered at SAJ, and I think that I want to suggest that when it's on the east wall, it helps us, because that's traditionally where it is, kind of know which way is which. So it might be about Jerusalem. We might feel a connection, maybe not about the restoration of the temple service, but maybe there's this sense of Jerusalem as the navel of the universe, or maybe just as a place with deep historical meaning, maybe a symbol of peace, or maybe our longing for there to be peace there. I also think, though, that that's not only what it's about. I really think that understanding that this way is east maybe helps us connect to the geography of the planet as a whole and the very land that we're on. Another verse from our parsha, which is right after the ones that we read this morning, describes the east wall, the dimensions of the east wall of the Mishkan. It's verse 27:13. There's a midrash on this verse, which uses the verse to explain that when the first human was created, Adam Harishon was created, God was forming this human out of the earth. That's in the Torah. In this midrash, God is doing that by gathering the loose soil from all across the globe and then kneading that soil together. So kneading the soil from the east with that of the west. The midrash says that if Adam had been made only from the soil of the east and wished to travel westward, travel across the world, that part of the planet might say, "The dust of your body did not come from me. I will not welcome you." Since the soil was gathered from 4 corners of the globe all over the world, no single part of the earth could say, "The dust of the body of Adam is mine alone," and everywhere the human traveled, the earth would welcome them. There's a teaching that everywhere the Jewish people went through many exiles, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, went with us. And I think this midrash about the soil and the creation of the first human teaches us that not only wherever we go, wherever we have gone, did this comforting presence come with us, but also everywhere we went, the land itself kind of welcomed us or welcomes us. There's a sense of belonging here, like belonging on the earth, that it's not about like laying claim to a particular piece of property. No part of the earth can say you're mine alone, and this isn't, it's not suggesting that we say that either. And I think it might actually be about remembering that the land doesn't belong to us at all. Maybe remembering something about kind of the sacredness of land, and remembering even also that we are, right now, we're here on traditional Lenape lands, the indigenous peoples of this place, this island called Manhattan, but called Mannahatta. And also just about remembering that we belong, especially for those of us who maybe have not felt that sense of belonging, that we can remember that we are welcomed. And so I think if we take this midrash as truth, which you can debate me about that, but I feel actually that there's a deep emotional truth to it for me that feels very powerful. If the earth is welcoming us, then the least that we can do is return that welcome with our own care. So perhaps the setting up of our sanctuaries or the placement of the menorah in the Mishkan, these verses are instructions for how to orient ourselves in relation to the planet so that we can kind of be aware in this like big picture, geographical, planetary sense, like try to remember and connect to the reality that the earth is so much bigger than humans, that the land we're on needs our care. We might remember some of the specific things like, okay, this is the east, the sun is rising. Even though we're inside, we know the sun rises from this direction. The Atlantic Ocean is this way. There's a vast continent behind us. We might even think about how our ancestors maybe traveled to get here, oceans that they might have crossed, thinking about that kind of journey across the planet. So I want to open it up for discussion, and I'm curious to hear if there's anyone that wants to share your own memories about how the actual sanctuary set up, and then I see you, Athena, so I'll call on you. And if people on Zoom, if you can maybe raise your Zoom hand, or if so you can get spotlighted, and I'll be able to see you and call on you. And then I'm curious to hear also if anybody just wants to share, do you agree with me that the setup of our spaces is an opportunity to kind of be aware of the natural world and connect to that, or do you have your own take on some of those commentaries that I shared? So we'll start with Athena, and I'll bring the mic around.
Okay, so to start with, every time I read this parsha, the traveling ark that's upstairs that holds the Torah that we do when we have a kid service or a family service upstairs or something like that was actually made by a synagogue member, Elisha Ignatoff, who actually modeled it off of this. So if you actually look at it and the dimensions, and he actually went through with cubits and it's got poles, and it's actually based off of this. So every time we come to this parsha, I immediately have this image of him describing, and we should somehow get that written down for the 100th, but he actually went through and modified these dimensions to make it fit. So the next time you see it upstairs, that you're upstairs, is actually really kind of cool. It actually connects to this. That's number one. Number two, that was definitely the ark. The bima, it was raised. There were blue velvet chairs. It was like pew-like almost. I mean, they were seats, but it was almost like you walked into a church and there were two aisles, and your view was 100% that way. And they actually chose to move the bima. So the ark. So the ark that is here is actually the same ark. It was an intentional move, right? So the actual structure was taken from there and moved. But what I always thought was interesting was that it still works with the windows, right? So when the windows were done, even though the ark was there, you still have the ability to have the ark centered in the windows here. And to me, that kind of blew my mind when we moved it, that it still worked in between two sets of windows, which one would not necessarily think had been designed that way, but it still worked. So that always kind of like made me blow my mind a little. And the third thing that I wanted, two more, no, really fast. One is, I like this parsha because to me it's about traditional dress of our space. Right? What we choose to do, there are things where we talk about the priests and their clothing and traditional dress. And for those of you who know my father and I, dressing for services is important, right? That's part of that space that we make for ourselves. It's also the space that it's traditional dress for our space. And the last thing is that for the 100th, the kids were asked to put something in a time capsule that was important to them. Riva drew the sanctuary because the space is important and it encapsulates how she feels about this space. So this parsha and talking about space and where you are and its importance of what it is and how it's set up, that's what she chose to put in the capsule.
That's so wonderful. Okay, I see Sylvia and Jonah, several people in the sanctuary. Let's go to several people online. Carol, do you want to, and if folks can just be brief so we can get to everybody.
I'll try my best to be as brief as possible. The thing that I was here just a little while before the sanctuary was remade, and I remember the seats were like the most uncomfortable seats, like an auditorium in a public school. They were just very difficult, and I'm amazed to think about people sitting in those chairs for all those years. I would like to say about the Parsha that what I don't see in the sanctuary is all the colors that are described. The sanctuary is very, very beige, so to speak. The colors are in the windows, is the way I look at it. And the other thing is the description, the natural world. I love the way you put it together in terms of the east and the west and the north and the south. And the natural world is in the making, in the description of the woods. And I would just like to connect it to, I just finished reading a wonderful Pulitzer Prize book called The Over Story. And if you want to read a book that connects us to the natural world so deeply, I suggest that, because it connects the sense of being human to that sensibility of nature, and the fact that there's so much description in this parsha of the various woods and how they're used, as well as the colors, I think is part of that sensibility. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to add, actually, speaking of color, also that I learned from Deborah Fricano that so Macomb has been doing some learning about the mural that's upstairs in the social hall, which many folks may know, but it used to be here, and I believe it was actually here on the south wall, so it was opposite the ark. And it was controversial because there's images of people, and to have images of humans in a sanctuary is kind of a controversial thing, but it was there. It's a huge mural, and now there's a whole history of it that we won't go into, but you can ask Deborah for more information. Here's Sylvia.
Just a little addition to what was just said. The bema was high, and there was a huge philosophical discussion about during the time of the renovation about making it level, and that was a point of real discussion, and we now see that it is accessible in a very different way.
Do you want to say, was that about accessibility of people kind of being able to, or was it about everyone being on the same?
It was more an egalitarian concept.
Nice. Okay, I saw, Diane and Phil, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you want to say something?
Yes. I want to say thank you, first of all, Noah, to all of your learning today. Very much appreciated and very wonderful. For anyone who wants to see what the SAJ synagogue looked like prior to the renovation, you should stream Angels in America, because in the opening scene in the synagogue, that is our synagogue, for Angels in America, with Meryl Streep playing the rabbi at the bema. And I am told, or I read, that the producers wanted to find a sort of beaten up old synagogue in which to set those those opening scenes. So by all means, do that and you will get the feel of SAJ pre-reconstruction of the actual sanctuary. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. I've seen that movie more than once, and I didn't know I'm going to have to watch it again. Okay.
Just a really quick thing, piggybacking on the conversation about the egality. I really remember as a small child how little we felt and how big Rabbi Miller was up there, high up on the bema. It really felt like there was royalty up there. And then we had to go up there to do the little Purim spiel, and it was scary. There really was, I was also small anyway, but there was this definite feeling of the regular people, and then when he started coming down to do the conversations with the congregation, I feel like that almost was a precursor to this setup, right, where there is that back and forth, and it isn't so much coming down. You're just strolling over. You're not stepping down. It's really, I love this. I think it's a nice continuation of the way it's all done.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so interesting to think about the way that the setup, you're speaking to how it's about our relationship to each other, really, which is a very important part of it. Okay, oh my goodness, we have so many people that want to talk, and I think we have maybe time for two more people. Yeah, two more people. So I'm gonna, okay, we'll go with David and Diana, and then we'll just have to leave it at there. I'm sorry, Jonah, and I'm sorry, Marilyn.
Hi, I actually want to go back to the days where that was the sanctuary, back to the 50s and 60s. That's what I remember. The idea of the bema being raised, don't forget, when we come up to read Torah, we are making aliyah, we are going up. And to me, that was extremely appropriate. Also, to the right of the bema, that's audience right and stage left, or bema left, if you're theatrical at all. That's where the choir sat. My father was a member of the choir. My mother had been also before I came trotting along. And because my mother and I always sat as close to the choir as we could, we were usually sitting right behind Sephora, who was the director of the choir, and I got to know her quite well also. So when I first came to the SAJ for an event a few years ago, after not having been here in a long time, and I noticed everything had changed, I was absolutely floored. And for a few times when I started, when I returned again last year, it was very, very difficult for me to walk into this new sanctuary and still think of it as the SAJ. I am still adjusting. Now, I am a member now, and I plan to keep adjusting, but this really knocked me around because I thought the SAJ sanctuary was the most beautiful room I have ever seen in my life, and I still feel that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Diana, if you can make a short comment, if possible. Sorry to give you that limitation. You have to unmute yourself.
Personally, I found the seats in the old sanctuary perfectly comfortable, and they had fabric on them. In many ways, I found them more comfortable than the hard ones that we have right now, frankly. But I would like to get back to your original discussion about the geometry of the Mishkan and the whole tabernacle and all the elements of it, as well as its placement directionally in the world. We have to remember, first of all, that the east toward Jerusalem is one aspect of having the ark on the east, but the other is the natural universe and the fact that in the northern hemisphere, as we turn, we turn toward in an easterly direction. The winds are from the west. It is all part of the geography and the geometry of the universe. And I'd also like to remark that historically, when you think about religious structures, going all the way back to the most ancient, the most Neolithic, that the direction of that one faced was exceptionally important, and that Neolithic people understood their geometry. If you go to the island of Orkney, you will see all of this in the alignment of the most famous burial chamber in the world at Maze Howe, the stone circles and the erected straight stones. They are perfect in their geometry. Where I come from, we have some amazing churches, and I hope you don't mind my referring to them, but the great English architect Christopher Wren was a mathematician. He felt that the combination, that geometry was perfect, geometry was beauty, and that the structure in itself did not have to have an extra aesthetic appeal, but the combination of straight lines and circular lines was the most perfect fundamental use of geometry to create beauty. And that therefore, and there are many, many other aspects of religious geometry. And I think the whole Mishkan, the Torah, fits very squarely in that. We don't have a unique tradition here. We're not the only people who have built houses of worship, and we are very much aware. We are very much in the great tradition of great religions who understand the relationship between nature and God and human beings, and spirituality, if you like, and aesthetics.
And I would love to hear more thoughts from folks that didn't get to share as well. And I think I just want to add a couple of things before we continue with our service. I'm just thinking about how actually in the Babylonian Talmud, when they say to go to the ark, they say actually go down. So it's the opposite of going up for an aliyah, so, which is really interesting. I think I'm not sure, but I think historically there were actually different setups. Like the synagogue setup was different in that time, 1,500 years ago, than it is now. And it's so interesting to get to think about this with all of you. So thank you. Yeah.